Today we're looking at the Golden Mirage Expert Advisor. And this one is quite interesting as it appears to be rapidly rising up the ranks of the MQL5 marketplace. It's made by Ms. Michaela Russo, who appears to be a fairly popular developer here on MQL5, but I haven't seen her on the top of the marketplace too often. If we look at the actual signals, apparently it's meant to be powered by the RSI, moving average, and some high-low indicators. So all of which seems like perhaps a real strategy. Those are all very common indicators to base a bot on. And also here it says that she's not using any sort of crazy AI, machine learning, etc. So at least she's not being as kind of fake or using fake AI like many other developers do. Granted, there are plenty of good developers who use real AI. By now, it's fairly common practice to use web requests to access different LLM models, but many developers still kind of fake it. And if we look at the page here, we're not getting a ton of more information apart from that. She's simply saying that it includes an auto lot and a risk adjustment feature. There's a spread filter. You can specify the magic numbers. So all of which makes a lot of sense. They're saying that both the RSI, the ADX, the moving averages are used as filters, which would be pretty logical. One thing to note is if you start stacking too many indicators on top of each other, your odds of overfitting just skyrocket immensely. You have to be very mindful of doing that. But overall, it looks like it could be something real. One thing to note is when we look at the actual live signal, she's running this on our favorite scam broker, WellTrade, which is not a good sign. And we're seeing here, yes, there is a fairly large amount of trades, but knowing that the initial deposit was $100, and this is very much a scam, like a scam broker, yeah, it doesn't really give us any sort of indication of how this thing works. The good thing is, when running a backtest, I actually have a pretty decent idea of how this thing operates. And it looks like a grid martingale on gold. And it's also specifically a grid martingale that's primarily long focused. So to move my head, you guys can see here that we're pretty much only going long. So you guys can see there, we're pretty much only going long. And the reason why this is kind of a little bit manipulated is it's very easy to say, hey, if you just bought gold for the past year and you never closed your losers, you just kept waiting for it to go up, you would have been profitable. And it's like, yeah, no, really, Sherlock. Obviously, if you know that gold has had this massive trend, it's really easy to make a grid martingale which only goes long, or the majority going long, that looks exceptional over the past year because you would have done very, very well. However, as we can see here in the backtest, very recently, as gold has not been just going up in a straight line, although there is a good chance it will resume eventually once Powell starts to be a little bit more likely to cut rates. Anyway, gold has been going down, so it went boom, and this can be pretty challenging. And essentially, what we're seeing here is this collapse happened in November. I would venture that there's probably a very big grid that kind of, so we started to see grids go down more and more and more. And let me go to the H1 just to see where the actual grid took place. Yeah, and here we can see this was one of the big grids that just took place on the 14th of November. And if we zoom in here, it looks like we probably hit an equity stop loss. Yeah, so we hit an equity stop loss. So granted, it's not that bad because it shows that there is an equity stop loss here, so it's not going to give it up entirely. But I would doubt the validity of the strategy going forward because it seems to have been heavily overfit to an exceptional environment in gold. And you could argue, and she does claim, that you can run this from 2003 until today, and it should still work. However, you also have to be a bit mindful that she could have overfit it to historical data. So just out of curiosity, let's try this now in 2022. Sorry, let me do 2022, 01, 01, all right, close enough, to 2023, no, 2023, 01, 01. We're trying to see if we do it over a period where things were perhaps a little bit less rosy for gold, where we didn't have a super strong uptrend, what is it going to look like? And particularly because most people will usually backtest over a fairly short period of time. Granted, you probably shouldn't backtest over 20 years just because you can if you're interested, but markets can change. So most developers won't fit a system to so far back because it might not be super indicative. So here we're testing it on 2022. We are seeing equity stop losses being hit significantly more often. There we go. And it doesn't I wouldn't call this thing a scam. It's just it's a fairly high-risk grid martingale with some overfitting. But there is an equity stop loss, and it does appear to be profitable even in these periods. Because essentially what they're doing is they're being so aggressive, and they're not hitting the stop loss that often. And we can see here is once again like it's primarily long. It's 920 long trades, 5 short trades. So I guess the shorts maybe are just coming out when it loses. It does like a final, like its last trade in the grid is a short. That could very well be the case. Let me try and see if there's any sort of direction here. So maybe when it gets out, it enters with one final sell. That's interesting. Okay, so yeah, it looks to be very much like a basic indicator-based system with boatloads of technical filters on it, trading a grid martingale on gold. And yeah, it's heavily overfit to a bullish price trend. And I know that you could say that, like, and I make this argument too with our longbow bots, that gold is generally a bullish asset, so bullish biased strategies work rather well. But the issue with that is, or the reason why I can do that is because I'm not using a grid. Whereas if you're overfitting a grid to pass data, you have less time to kind of get out and go cash or start shorting just because you have a tremendous amount of potential in order to blow your grid, and a tremendous amount of risk just because if the market conditions change, you can be in a lot of trouble. So overall, this is a pretty interesting bot. It's not a scam. There's something real here, but a grid martingale on gold is pretty high risk. So me personally, I would not run this system, but I can see why some people like it. And if we have a strong uptrend, it can do quite well. However, now as gold is kind of it is kind of resuming its uptrend slowly but surely, but we had a bit of a nasty or choppy period. It might not be the most ideal time to trade it, but honestly, to each their own. So real system, we know what it's doing. Basic technical analysis combined with grid money management. And the reason why it looks so good in backtest is because it's heavily overfit to a long uptrend. So guys, hope you enjoyed my video. I'll see you in the next one.